So I come to the floor today. I know there's been a lot of news over the last 24 hours about the nuclear option and how that's been averted here in the Senate and how good news that is for the institution. And by the way, I do value the Senate. I do value the ability of individual senators, and particularly of the minority, of which I hope I won't be a part of forever, but of the minority to speak and to be heard. And it's one of the things that makes this institution unique. But I think we have to answer a fundamental question about why is it that we have these rules in place? And in particular, why is it that we have these rules in place when we're dealing with nominees, people that are nominated to the cabinet or some other executive position? And it's because the Constitution gives the Senate the power to advise and consent, to basically review these nominees and find out information about them and then decide whether they should be confirmed or not. And there are two different standards with regards to that. The first standard is whether the nominee should be able to go forward on its hearing, and that requires a supermajority vote, the 60 votes, to continue debate, or quite frankly, it's kind of arcane. I don't want to do a tutorial on the Senate, but let me just say that if you can't get those 60 votes, then you have to continue to debate that nominee. And that's an important tool, not to obstruct, should be used judiciously, but it's a tool that you use to make sure that this process is being respected, that people are answering critical questions and valid questions. And it's an important tool to use. Now, it needs to be used judiciously. It needs to be used in a limited way. You can't do that on everybody. You shouldn't do that on everybody. And quite frankly, the minority has not done it on everybody, nor have I. I have been very careful in its use and tried to ensure that when we do use it, and when I do use it, that I use it for reasons that are valid. And so it's with that in mind that I'm very concerned about a nominee that will be before this body as early as today on a vote, on a 60-vote threshold, on a debate about whether to cut off debate on this individual and proceed to final confirmation. And that's this nominee for the Labor Department, Secretary, to head the Labor Department, a significant agency of our government that quite frankly has a direct impact on the ability of businesses to grow and hire people and so forth. This is an important nomination, and one that I think deserves careful scrutiny. Now, let me be frank and upfront. I have significant objections to this nomination on the basis of public policy, and I have stated that in the past. I believe this individual, Thomas Perez, who's currently an assistant attorney general, is a liberal activist who has used this position not just in the Department of Justice, but in other roles that he has played to advance a liberal agenda. One, quite frankly, that's out of touch with the majority of Americans, and that I believe would be bad for our economy. Hence the reason why I don't think it's a good idea for him to head the Labor Department. But the president has a right to his nominees. And so that's a reason to vote against his nomination. That in and of itself may not always be a reason to block a nomination from moving forward. Where I do think there is a valid reason to block someone's nomination from moving forward is when that individual has refused to cooperate with the process that is in place to review their nomination. When you are nominated to serve on the cabinet or in the executive branch, you get asked questions about things you've done in the past, about things you've said in the past, and you are expected to answer those fully and truthfully so that the members of this body can make a decision about your nomination based on the facts. And I don't know of anyone here that would dispute that, including people in the majority. Irrespective of how you feel about the nominee, every single senator here, and through us, the American people, have a right to fully know who it is we are confirming, whether it's to the bench or to the cabinet or to some other executive position. And that's a right that I think is critically important. And when a nominee refuses to cooperate with that process, that, I believe, is a valid reason to stand in the way of their nomination and to block it from moving forward until those questions are fully and truthfully answered. That, I do believe, is a reason not to vote for what they call around here cloture. And I think that's a case in point when it comes to this Labor nominee, Mr. Perez. And I want to take a few moments to argue to my colleagues why it is a bad idea for both Democrats and Republicans to allow this nomination to move forward until this nominee answers the questions that he's been asked by the Congress. Let me give the background. There was a case filed by the city of St. Paul in Minnesota, and this case had to do with a legal theory called disparate impacts. And it basically means, and I don't want to, it's not really on point per se, but it basically says that you look at how some policy is impacting people, and even if there wasn't the intent to discriminate against people, if the practical impact of it was that it was discriminating against people, let's say a bank was giving out loans, and although the loan officer wasn't looking to deny minorities that loan, As it turned out, the way they had structured the program meant that less minorities were getting those loans than they should be on a percentage basis, that under this theory, you would be allowed to go after these banks or go after whatever institution did that. That's this theory that's out there in law. The city of St. Paul had a challenge to that in court that chose to define exactly what that meant, and it got all the way to the Supreme Court. It was on the Supreme Court's docket. At the same time, the Justice Department was being asked to intervene in a whistleblower case regarding housing and urban development. And again, it would take too long to describe exactly why that's important, but the bottom line is that case against the city of St. Paul, the separate case, the whistleblower case, because of the way the law is written, they couldn't move forward on that case unless the Department of Justice intervened. And that's where the nominee, Mr. Perez, stepped in. And he's an enormous fan of the disparate impact theory. In fact, he had used it to go after banks, of all things, in his time at the Department of Justice. And by the way, at some point in the future, I will come to the floor and detail why I object to his nomination, why I object to his appointment and to his confirmation. But today I'm just making the argument why it's a bad idea to move forward on this nomination until certain questions are answered. And this is where Mr. Perez steps in. And what he basically did is he basically went to the city of St. Paul and said, look, if you drop your Supreme Court case, we will not intervene in the whistleblower case. It's what is known in Latin as a quid pro quo. You do this for me, I'll do that for you. In essence, city of St. Paul, drop your Supreme Court case, and I will not intervene on behalf of the Department of Justice. Now, he argues reasons why he did that were based on, in fact, he told the House committee, the reason why I did that is because I thought this was a bad case. It had bad facts, and I didn't want to move forward on the HUD whistleblower case anyway. He claimed that. But in fact, a subsequent investigation found that a career attorney in the Department of Justice actually didn't feel that way at all. A career attorney who was involved in this case believed it was a good case. And in fact, in a meeting about the case, he expressed concern that this looked like we were buying off, quote unquote, the city of St. Paul. So right away, the nominee had, quite frankly, misled the Congressional committee when he argued it was a bad case. Everybody agreed that the facts were bad. In fact, that's not true. The career prosecutor that was looking at this case wanted to move forward and was concerned that what the way this looked like is that it was a buy-off. But then the nominee was asked, by the way, did you use your personal email to conduct this deal? Did you email with people about it? We understand your federal account, we have access to that, but did you use your personal accounts? You know, we all have business accounts and we all have personal email accounts. The question was, did you use your personal accounts to cut this deal or to negotiate this deal or even talk about it with anybody? And his answer was he couldn't recall. He had no recollection of that. But subsequently, however, it was discovered that in fact he had used, on at least one occasion initially, he had used his email to discuss something with someone at the city of St. Paul. So that's when the House Oversight Committee stepped in, and it asked him voluntarily and the Justice Department voluntarily to produce any emails from his private account that had to do with this official capacity. Understand the request. It wasn't send us emails between you and your children, or send us emails between you and your family, or send us emails about you planning your vacation. What they asked for is any emails from your private accounts that have to do with your official capacity. And the Justice Department responded to that request by saying, we have found 1,200 instances of the use of his personal emails for official business. And we found at least, the number initially was 34, but then 35 instances where it violated the open records laws of the federal government. So he was voluntarily asked to produce these emails to the House. He refused. The House then subpoenaed these records, a subpoena, which has the power of Congress behind it, basically compelling you must produce it now. And again, he refuses to produce these emails. So we have before the Senate today a nominee to head the Labor Department of the United States of America that refuses to comply with a congressional subpoena on his email records regarding his official business conduct. Refuses to comply, won't even answer, ignores it. Now, here's what I would say to you. How can we possibly vote to confirm somebody if they refuse to produce relevant information about their official conduct? Think about that. This is an invitation for any official in the executive branch to basically conduct all their business in their private accounts, because they know that they will never have to produce it. They can just ignore the Congress. Now, the nominee, Mr. Perez, hides behind the Department of Justice and says, well, they're handling this for me. But the problem is the Department of Justice does not possess these emails. These are his emails from his personal account that he refuses to produce. If, in fact, there is nothing to worry about, and I'm not claiming, I haven't seen the emails, I don't know what's in them, none of us do, that's the point. And the fact is that we are now being asked to vote to confirm someone, not just to vote to confirm someone, to give them 60 votes to cut off debate on the nomination of someone who is in open contempt of a congressional subpoena and repeated requests, including a bipartisan request. I have it here with me. A bipartisan request signed by Mr. Issa of California, Mr. Cummings, the ranking minority member, dated May 8, 2013. We write to request that you produce all documents responsive to the subpoena issued to you by the committee on April 10th of 2013 regarding your use of non-official email account to conduct official Department of Justice business. The department has represented to the committee, the Justice Department, has told the committee that there are roughly 1,200 such emails that exist. To allow the committee to fully examine these emails, please produce all these documents in unredacted form to the committee no later than Friday, May 10th, 2013. And the answer is nothing. Silence. Crickets. This is wrong. How can we possibly move forward on a nominee? I don't care what deal's been cut. How can we possibly move forward on someone until we have information that they've been asked by a congressional committee? This is outrageous. If ever there was an instance where someone's nomination should not move forward, this is a perfect example of it. I'm not standing here saying deny this nominee 60 votes because I think he's a liberal activist. I do, and I think that's the reason why he shouldn't be confirmed. What I'm saying to my Republican colleagues is, I don't care what deal you cut. How could you possibly agree to move forward on a nomination when the nominee refuses to comply with a congressional subpoena to turn over records about official business at the Justice Department? And by the way, we're not confirming him to an ambassador post in some obscure country halfway around the world. This is the Labor Department. This is the Labor Department. I am shocked that there are members of my own conference that would be willing to go forward and ahead on a nomination like this, that are willing to give 60 votes on a nomination like this, on a nominee that has, quite frankly, flat out refused to comply with a congressional subpoena and answer questions that are legitimate and important. We are about to make someone the head of one of the most powerful agencies in America, impacting the ability of businesses to grow and create jobs at a time, quite frankly, when our economy is not doing very well. We're about to nominate someone and appoint someone to that committee, to chair that agency, to head up that agency, when that individual has refused to comply with a legitimate request. How can we possibly go along with that? I understand how important it is to protect the rights of minorities here. I understand how important it is to protect the right of the minority party to speak out and block efforts that move forward. But my goodness, what's the point of even having the 60-vote threshold if you can't use it for legitimate reasons? This is not me saying I'm going to block this nominee until I get something I want. This is a nominee that refuses to cooperate, that flat out has just ignored Congress and told them to go pound sand. And you're going to vote for this individual to move forward until this question is answered? I would implore my colleagues, quite frankly, on both sides of the aisle, because this sets a precedent. There won't be a Democratic president forever, and there won't be a Senate Democratic majority forever. But at some point in the future, you will have a Republican president. And they're going to nominate people, and those people may refuse to comply with a records request. And you're not going to want those records? You're not going to stand. In fact, you have in the past blocked people for that very purpose. And so I ask my colleagues again, how can you possibly move forward on a nominee that refuses to comply with giving us the information we need to fully vet that nomination? This is a serious constitutional obligation we have. Do we have an obligation to the Senate and to this institution, being a unique legislative body? Absolutely. But we have an even more important obligation to our Constitution and to the role the Senate plays in reviewing nominations and the information behind that nomination. And we are being blatantly denied relevant information. And we have colleagues of mine that say it doesn't matter, move forward. This is wrong. It's not just wrong, it's outrageous. Again, I do not think that we should use, and nor do I think we have, by the way, use the 60-vote threshold as a way to routinely block nominees from moving forward. You look at the record, this president's done very well with his nominations across the board. Judiciary, cabinet, executive branch. But my goodness, could we at least agree that I have a right as a senator from Florida, that all of you have a right as a senator from your states, to have information, all the relevant information on these nominees before we move forward? And I'm telling you, if we're ready to concede that point, then what's the point of even having the 60-vote threshold if you can never use it for legitimate purposes? And so I would argue to my colleagues today, let's not have this vote today. Let's not give 60 votes on this nominee until he produces these emails and we have time to review them so that we can fully understand what was behind not just this quid pro quo deal, but behind his public service at the Justice Department as an assistant attorney general, quite frankly, confirmed by this Senate with the support of Republicans. This is not an unreasonable request. And for us to surrender the right to ask these questions is a dereliction of duty, and it is wrong. If ever there was a case in point for why the 60-vote threshold matters, this is an example of one. And I'm telling you, if this moves forward, there is no reason why any future nominee would not decide to give us the same answer. And that is, you get nothing. I tell you nothing. I tell you what I want you to know. And then we are forced to vote up or down on someone that we do not have information on. And that is wrong. So there is still time to change our minds on this. I think this is a legitimate exercise of this, not forever. Let him produce these emails. Let us review these emails and then bring them up for a vote. And then you can vote on them, whether you like it or not, based on all the information. But to allow someone to move forward who's basically telling an oversight committee of Congress, I don't have to answer your questions. I don't even have to respond to your letters. I ignore you. I want you to think about the precedent you're setting. I want you to think about how that undermines the constitutional, not just the right, the constitutional obligation of this body to provide advice and consent on presidential nominees. And I think this is especially important when someone is going to be a member of the cabinet and overseeing an agency with the scope and the power of the Labor Department. And so I still hope that there is time to convince as many of my colleagues as possible. I don't hold great hopes that I will convince a lot of my Democratic colleagues, but I hope that I can convince the majority of my Republican colleagues to refuse to give the 60 votes to move forward and cut off debate on this nominee until Chairman Issa and the Oversight Committee gets answers to their questions that, quite frankly, we would want to know. They've taken leadership on asking these questions, but we're the ones that have to vote on the nominee. They're doing us a favor asking these questions. We should, at a minimum, stand here and demand that these be answered before we move forward.